So I got the driver's side head off, and it looked pretty gross in there, just like the other side. Lots of rust. Obviously there's some coolant or water in the cylinders from pulling the head off. It goes through the water jackets in the block and it falls into the heads there. But this is the head. This is how nasty it looks on the other side. A lot of the valves seem to be somewhat rusted, and this is looking at it at a little better of an angle. You can see the spark plug holes are messed up. This one particularly is screwed up. This is what they should look like, rounded on the top there. But you can see this one's kind of broken off, and that was the spark plug that came out kind of easy. So the next thing I did was suck everything out of these cylinders that I could. So when it came time to pull the engine out, I wasn't spilling all over the place. And I was also trying to see if, after I cleaned them up a little bit, if there was any way to rotate the block. And I wanted to try to get the rotating assembly to move so that I could try to get to the torque converter bolts on the transmission so that I could take the engine out without having to pull the torque converter with it. But that's something that I was not successful at. Everything was rusted so bad no matter what I did. It was just too hard to get anything to move. But this is just kind of a mess to clean up anyway, and I just thought this would be a good way to do it. I also wanted to go about it this way to get the heads off the car so it'd be easier to take the short block out. I've done it before, taking everything out together, or just the short block. I did remove the radiator fan so that I'd have more room to work with, because I was pretty sure the torque converter was going to stay on the flex plate and I was going to pull it out. So I pushed the car into the street, and then I pushed it up to where I wanted to work on it. I thought it'd be nice to have it on more flat ground without gravel so I can run the engine hoist underneath it and pull on it to pull it out and everything. It's really interesting when you push your own car. I've done this a lot, and you realize how much weight that is, and that the car is pushing you all the time. And so it's kind of interesting to see how much the car is actually doing for you. But anyway, next thing was to put the car up on jack stands and take the hood off again. I've already had the hood off, but I keep it on there so if it rains or if there's frost or anything, it doesn't get on the electrical connections and everything that's there. So again, took the hood off the car and put it on the grass where I wouldn't chip the corners of it. If you stand it upright, you'll chip the corners on the back, so be careful if you ever do that, because it's not cool to do that to the hood. You feel really bad about it afterwards, and pretty dumb too. So the engine hoist, you can see the cylinder is missing, the hydraulic cylinder. It gave up on me. No matter what I did, I couldn't get that to work, so I went to Harbor Freight and found a nice replacement. And driving back in the 97 GT and seeing this one there is always kind of fun to see your car. But anyway, there's a nice bright red new jack from Harbor Freight, and it worked really nice. So started pulling the engine out here and wiggling it off the transmission, and I did get the torque converter to slide forward enough. I got it loose, and I was able to pull the engine and torque converter off. I also had an old tire nearby and ready, so that as soon as I got it out of the engine, I had somewhere to put it on, and I was going to continue to work on the engine in this location until I could get all the stuff off of it that I needed. I mean, not everything, but a lot of the stuff I was working on getting off. So I tried to go down easy with it and everything, but I had to kind of swing it to get the torque converter to not go into the hole of the tire there. So that worked out nicely. So here is everything out of the car, just kind of an overview of what it looks like with no engine in the car. It looks like a mess, but there's really not a whole lot to it once you've done it a few times. And here's the engine. See how nasty it looked? It's just kind of good to look it over and see it out of the car and be able to see things from a different view. So there you go. There's no engine in the car. Now it's funny how high the front suspension is now with no engine in there. Everybody complains about the stock ride height on these cars with the stock springs, but now look at it. It looks like it's lifting the wheels at the track. Now I still wanted to get the oil pan off and try to get the pistons free, or at least look and see if they were hydrolocked, so I can try to rotate the engine to get to the torque converter bolts without having to get too crazy with it. But ultimately I couldn't do anything. It looked kind of gross under here. There's the milky, yucky oil. The oil pickup tubes there, I didn't want to bend that because I'm going to try to reuse that. But one of the torque converter bolts stripped really easily, and it's in a decent place, so I wasn't too worried, but I had to get my drill out and I had to drill this thing off, and it took a long time. I was trying to be careful without hurting the flex plate because I need to reuse the flex plate. And so I was able to get the rest of the torque converter bolts off. I did use liquid wrench, everything I could, and so that was off, and I zipped off the flex plate. So here's the nasty oil pan with all the stuff in it, and there's the flex plate, 6-bolt and everything. So now I started taking things off that I was going to need to reuse, like this oil filter adapter. I do have another one, but I wanted to get everything off this block I could. So here is how nasty it is in the rotating assembly. Those pistons were rusted in place, and the block had rust inside, and even the wrist pins to the pistons were frozen up, so they had a hard time even rotating even at that. So this is just kind of a look at how gross it was in there. I was surprised, however, to find out that the crankshaft was pretty clean and that the rust that was on it came off real easy. It just wiped off. And when I took off some of the caps on the bottom of the pistons, the bearings look great. There's the oil filter full of grossness. It was mostly water in there. This engine had basically only water in it. It was so gross by the time I got to it. Even the water pump had rust all inside of it. It had a new water pump on it, but when I took it off, the backside was kind of rusty. It might be salvageable. Well, the next thing I had to do was take the exhaust manifolds off the heads because I have to reuse them. Here's another look at the heads and how gross they are, how rusted they are. And of course the busted up spark plug thread that I was showing you earlier. But I put liquid wrench on the bolts for the exhaust, and oh man, look, inside the exhaust was getting pretty nasty too. So I was going to clean that up too. So I got the bolts off and the hardware, and I even went back and got the studs out. I'll show you I did that. But the exhaust gaskets are actually the same as the Crown Vic and the Mustangs. I compared them. But there's the manifolds off, and I kind of laid them on there how they should go, especially for reference when I go to put them back on. I have new exhaust gaskets, but anyway, I wanted to get these studs out too because some of the studs and bolts came out of the other heads, and I just wanted to have as much as I could. And you know, when I take these back as a core, they said make sure to get everything you want off of them, so I got everything off of these heads. Now this is a 5mm is what worked for me to get these studs out. And I did want to address the rust inside, so I did take a wire brush and I got in as deep as I could everywhere in all the ports and everything and just got this off. It flaked off pretty easy. It wasn't too bad, but I just wanted that all out of there. So here's the head gasket, and you can see right here is where the head gasket had broken. This is why the engine had a bad head gasket and where the water was getting through. So I just thought I'd show you that before I threw them in the trash. Now, like I said, I took off some of the end caps of the rods and the bearings came out and they were perfect. Those bearings looked great. So I thought, you know, if this crankshaft is salvageable at all, I'm going to get it out. So I had to persuade it a little bit with this block of wood, and that broke the pistons loose in the cylinders and got them to rotate ever so slightly. And so at that point I was able to rotate the crank enough and pull it out enough so I could get to the rest of the bolts on the connecting rods, and I was able to get them all off, get them out, and the crank and the journals on it looked really nice and the rust cleaned up nicely. So I was able to salvage the crank, and we'll see what I do with it later, but I took the engine back as the core and they took it as it was with the heads with things stripped out of them. So that's the update for the 2003 Mustang GT at this moment. It's nice to have it sitting there with the old stuff out of it, the core returned so I could get my core fee back, and now I'm just ready to transfer everything over to the other engine and put it in the car. So stay tuned for more of these updates. I hope you enjoyed watching all this. It's kind of fun to watch. Even I like to go back and watch this to see how much work it was. But this will make a nice little daily driver. I'm enjoying driving the 97 GT right now, and I had to do all this for that car too. And it's really nice to drive it around and have something that was off the road for a few years and now have it back in society, have it back driving around and part of the car world out there. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates.